This monstrous story will not leave anyone indifferent. A 14-year-old girl went out for a walk and disappeared without a trace. She was searched for more than a month, and this investigation was the largest in 9 years. Thanks to hundreds of police officers and surveillance tapes, the mystery was solved, but the truth was far more confusing and shocking. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Alice Gross. Alice Gross was born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 2000, in London. She grew up in a full, loving family. She also had an older sister. From an early age, the girl showed an affinity for creativity. She loved to draw and play the piano and violin. Later, Alice began to write her own gorgeous songs and perform them to her own music. In addition, the girl was fond of clothes design and at age 11, even made herself a dress, which she planned to wear at a school graduation. When the girl was 13 years old, doctors diagnosed her with anorexia and depression. Despite all of this, Alice continued to pursue creativity and had every chance of achieving tremendous success in the future. On August 28, 2014, Alice told her mother that she was going on an outing. She had school vacations and plenty of free time, so the girl loved to walk along a small water canal and river near her home. The family lived in a suburb of London called Hanwell, and her usual route was 4.5 kilometers. The girl went out at about 3 p.m., promising her parents she would return around 6 p.m. She later texted her father that she would be home soon, but Alice did not return at the appointed time. And when it was already 7 p.m. on the clock, her parents began to worry. They tried calling her, but her phone was off. The fact that Alice suffered from anorexia and depression only added to her anxiety. Her parents feared something might have happened to her. Because of her physical condition, she was constantly weak and could faint. Her parents called some of her friends in the hope that Alice might be with them, but no one had seen the girl that day, and her mother and father decided to call the police. They immediately began a search, and the first thing they did was to investigate the route Alice usually took. Her relatives and friends of the family also joined the search. Alas, they could not find any trace of the girl, but detectives were able to find several witnesses. Thanks to their testimony about the places where Alice had passed, the police were able to determine her route more accurately, which in turn allowed them to narrow the search area and select several street cameras that could have captured her. After examining the footage, detectives did locate Alice. Almost immediately after leaving the house, she was caught on the first camera, heading along the Grand Union Canal. A short time later, she was spotted in the Bryn Ford area, which was further down the canal. The last time the camera captured her was on her way back near her home. The girl was walking near the Trampers Way Bridge. The police also reported the missing teenager to the media, and they broke the news about the case all over London in the first hours after her disappearance. Thanks to that, detectives received several calls from witnesses who had seen Alice. Unfortunately, none of this brought the police any closer to finding the girl. Based on camera footage and witness accounts, she disappeared on her way home, having traveled most of her usual route. But what happened to her remained a mystery. 3 days went by as police continued to examine camera footage in nearby neighborhoods and surveyed local parks and other secluded areas. At the same time, patrol officers went door to homes along Alice's route and asked questions of local residents. On September 1st, the girl's relatives recorded a video message begging her to return home. They also asked anyone who had any information about her whereabouts to contact the police. At the time, investigators were considering several theories. The first and most troubling was the kidnapping version. Despite the fact that most of Alice's route was along city streets, there were many remote and hidden areas where the girl might have been attacked. In addition, the London police often encountered situations where people were kidnapped right in the center, let alone in the suburbs. The second was a theory about running away from home. Alice's parents feared that depression might have driven her to such a decision. They also didn't rule out the possibility that the girl might have taken her own life because of her illness, but to the police, this version seemed unlikely. At 14, Alice was unlikely to be able to run away and hide, especially without help, and if she had taken her own life, she would very likely have been found by now. The case attracted more and more public attention every day, and on September 3rd, it was handed over to a special unit of Scotland Yard. Although they usually only worked on homicides, the detectives rated the chance of getting the girl home as high. Scotland Yard organized a large-scale search, which was immediately joined by hundreds of volunteers. After seeing the heartbreaking appeal of her parents and sister in the news, concerned Londoners combed the area from early morning until late at night. And the next day, detectives announced the discovery of the first tangible clue. They managed to find Alice's backpack, which contained her shoes worn that day. It was relatively close to her home. This find allowed the police to narrow their search, focusing on a small area near the canal. Investigators realized it was unlikely the girl had taken off her shoes herself, thrown them in with her backpack, and fled. She did not have a change of shoes with her, so the situation became more and more complicated. Scotland Yard decided to release all available surveillance footage of Alice. The backpack with the shoes indicated that the girl might be in serious danger. The main version was still an abduction, but the investigators did not completely rule out the possibility that the girl might have committed suicide. For that reason, they tried to use all available resources to locate her. The publication of the recordings might draw more attention among the public, and someone might remember seeing Alice that day. Along with that, several hundred more people from various agencies were involved in the search, and there were already 600 people working on the case. The investigation was thus the largest since 2005 in terms of the number of police officers involved. Some of them were directly surveying the area, while others were examining footage from hundreds of cameras that could have captured Alice. Scotland Yard also offered a £20,000 reward for any information that could help find the girl. Although police were unable to locate her phone, they asked the cell phone company for details of its last known location. It turned out that Alice had sent a message to her father from practically the same place where they would later find her backpack. Everything indicated that the investigators needed to focus on that particular location. The decision was made to conduct a thorough inspection of an area of several square kilometers. Every meter of land and water was examined manually. Police teams literally probed the river and canal bottoms for any evidence. 2 days after the discovery of the backpack, it became known that the police arrested a 25-year-old man on suspicion of Alice's murder. The next day, they arrested another man, but refused to comment on the situation until all the details were clarified. However, soon both suspects were released, and Scotland Yard stated that they were unable to establish the involvement of these two people in Alice's disappearance. More than a week passed, and during all that time there was no progress in the case. It was only on September 16th that the police made another statement. They said they were looking for a 41-year-old man named Zalkalns in connection with Alice's disappearance. He moved to England from Latvia 7 years ago. He lived in the area and worked as a construction worker. Scotland Yard became interested in him for 2 reasons that at first glance seemed unrelated. First, Arnes's co-worker reported him to the police about his disappearance as early as September 3rd. The man did not show up for work, did not answer his phone, and was not at home. It seemed as if he had simply vanished. Second, detectives found that Zalkalns' route from home to work was roughly the same route that the girl had taken the day she disappeared. All of this was not yet enough to draw any conclusions about the man's involvement in the girl's disappearance, but detectives soon discovered something really disturbing. In one of the camera recordings, they saw a middle-aged man riding his bicycle across the bridge where Alice had passed just a few minutes before. This man turned out to be Zalkalns. A short time later, he came to the next camera, and here the detectives noticed a very strange moment. The journey between these cameras should have taken only a few minutes, and it took the man on the bicycle practically a whole hour to ride down this road. A reasonable question arose. What was he doing all that time on such a short stretch? The police investigated the area and concluded that he could not have taken the longer route to the next cell, because there simply was none. Even more disturbing was the fact that all this was taking place in the very area where Alice's path was allegedly cut short. The cops also concluded that the man's clothes were wet when he pulled onto the road. Continuing to study the cameras, detectives noticed Zalkalns on his bicycle returning to the same location 2 hours later after riding back out 50 minutes later. In doing so, he was not caught on the camera located on the bridge. This indicated that the man had spent all that time inside a small blind spot. Besides, he was already wearing different clothes. About an hour later, he was caught on a camera at a local store buying beer. The next morning, the situation repeated itself. Zalkalns returned to the same spot between the cameras at about 7 o'clock, and also returned there again in the evening. All this was enough to get a search warrant for his house. It turned out that the man was living there with his girlfriend and their 2 daughters together. His roommate also had no idea where Zalkalns had gone. When she learned that he was suspected of killing the girl, she stated that Arnis could never do something like that. She described him as a caring and loving father. Along with this, Scotland Yard examined the man's biography and discovered a truly creepy moment. It turned out that the Zalkalns had a rich criminal past. In 1998, being in Latvia, he killed his wife in cold blood and calculatedly, having dug a grave for her in the woods, for which he got only 7 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he moved to England, and the local law enforcement agencies did not even know about his criminal record in his home country. Police officers searched Zalkalns' home and found a recently excavated plot of land on his property. They did not disclose whether they found any evidence there, but a significant find awaited them in the basement of their house. A broken back panel from a white iPhone 4S was found there. Alice had the exact same phone. After examining the contents of his computer, the police also discovered that the man had searched the internet for information about Alice Gross's disappearance a few days after the incident. On the basis of all this, Arnis Zalkalns was put on the wanted list. Scotland Yard feared that the man might have fled back to Latvia or another European country, so they searched all over the EU. But law enforcement authorities were unable to find a single trace of the suspect. Meanwhile, a month had passed since Alice's disappearance, and on September 30th, police issued a depressing statement. A human body was found in a river near the girl's disappearance. At the time, the identity was not yet known, but police shared one eerie fact. Someone had gone to great lengths to arrange for the body to remain underwater and not resurface. Only the next day, law enforcement authorities confirmed that the deceased was Alice Gross, though no one doubted it anymore. The scene was in the exact spot where she had disappeared. The cause of death was asphyxiation. It turned out that Alice's body had been wrapped in construction bags and tied to a large tree stump. In addition, the perpetrator made a whole structure out of a bicycle wheel and bricks, which also prevented the body from surfacing. She also had no clothes on except for one sock. Detectives paid a visit to the setup where Zalkalns worked and discovered that the same bags used to hide Alice's body were the same ones used at his construction site. After the discovery of the body, police continued to search for Zalkalns, working closely with Interpol and local European intelligence agencies, but they were still unable to find any trace of him. This went on until October 4th, when investigators made an unexpected discovery. They discovered the man's suspended body in a park just 1 kilometer from where Alice was murdered. 2 days later, experts confirmed that the deceased was Ernest Zalkalns. No one expected such a turn of events. The main version of Scotland Yard was the escape of the suspect to Europe, but in fact it turned out that all this time he was under their noses. Medical experts concluded that the man had committed suicide on the day of his disappearance, September 3rd, and that he could not be found for a month. Nothing surprising here, however. Zalkalns had chosen a very remote and hard-to-reach location where he was extremely difficult to spot. With Zalkalns' DNA in hand, investigators had even more evidence. Near where Alice's body was found, police found a cigarette butt, which was sent to a lab. Experts extracted DNA from the filter, which matched the Zalkalns sample. In addition, the lab said that it was highly likely that the perpetrator's DNA was found on the victim's body. They could not assert this with 100% certainty due to how long the body had been underwater. His DNA was also found on the girl's backpack and shoes. By that time, the police had discovered another gruesome fact. It turned out that 2 years after moving to England, Zalkalns had molested a 14-year-old girl just a kilometer away from where Alice's body was found. The man attempted some indecent act, but the victim survived and the man was arrested. This is where the fun part begins. The girl did not press formal charges and the perpetrator was simply released. It is not entirely clear how this could have happened, but the fact remains. An adult man molested a girl, fell into the hands of the police and escaped punishment. Moreover, information about this case surfaced after the perpetrator's body was found in the park. Despite all this, the police continued to investigate and it took them some time to put together a picture of what had happened. According to their version, on that unfortunate day, August 28th, Zalkalns was riding his bicycle along the same route where Alice was walking. Having noticed her in a secluded area, hidden from prying eyes, he attacked her in order to commit depraved acts. How events unfolded next we shall never know, but the outcome was tragic. Zalkalns killed Alice, and then hid her body in several approaches, constantly returning to the place. We will also never know why he decided to take his own life after what he had done. Whether this can be called a manifestation of conscience is very debatable. Alice's parents, who survived such a terrible tragedy, were outraged by the government's actions. They were perplexed how the British authorities allowed a convicted murderer to enter the country and stay here to live. They had spent years fighting for the government to increase its control over migrants and keep criminals out. Unfortunately, to this day they have been unable to make any serious changes. A month after the discovery of Zalkalns' body, another interesting event occurred. The medical examiner in charge of the investigation left a folder of case documents on the train. The 30 pages contained important information about the murder, including medical information and undisclosed details. The public, the media, and Alice's parents harshly criticized the police, but there was nothing they could do about it. However, no one tried to judge the deceased perpetrator anyway. The investigators said that if he were alive, they would have had enough evidence to bring the case to court, but there was no guarantee of a conviction. The problem was that all the evidence against Zalkalns was circumstantial, and he had a small chance of getting away with it. Instead, a hearing was held in court in which the jury admitted an already obvious fact. Alice had been murdered. Her death was not an accident. The procedure was formal and played no role. Alice's funeral was held on October 23rd. Thousands of people came out to the memorial that day. And at the end of the ceremony, a beautiful song that the girl wrote and sang herself was shown on the big screen. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for watching.